In the early days of Siege, there was a pattern when it came to new operators. Normally they would be released in a really strong state or outright overpowered, and then they would fall out of the meta after a season or two. Well, the operator that we are discussing today just so happened to release in the perfect meta that allowed them to outshine all the other operators available at the time, and this would last for nearly a year. So for today's video, we will be going way back to Year 2, Season 3, also known as Operation Blood Orchid. On August 29th, 2017, Operation Blood Orchid would release to the public. Blood Orchid brought us tons of great new content. We got Theme Park as our new map and 3 new operators, which was a first at the time. Because of the lack of content in the previous operation, Operation Health, Ubisoft decided to give us 3 new operators, a new map, and 7 new weapons on these operators to make up for it. These operators released in an incredibly strong state. Legion released with the ability to see all his goo mines through walls. They would deal damage to you when stepped on, and over time. He had access to an extremely strong SMG in the form of the T5, and he had impacts on top of it all. He really had no downsides, and he quickly became one of the most picked operators. Ela released even more broken though. Her Scorpion was by far one of the most overpowered guns to ever be released in Siege. It had a magazine size of an LMG, an insanely fast fire rate, solid damage, and no recoil. As for her gadget, it was released in a much stronger state than it is today. Her Grismot mines used to disable your ability to sprint, make your walking speed significantly slower, your camera speed significantly slower. She had access to 4 of her Grismots, and she could set off a 5th one while she was down. This resulted in her pick rate skyrocketing alongside Legion, and she became the most picked defender in the game. But what we are here for today is the only attacker that came with the season, Ying. Now, if you don't know much about Ying, let me fill you in. Her gadget is the Candela, which is a flashbang that can be cooked and rolled across the floor. The main draw of her Candelas is that they have a much wider blinding radius than a traditional flashbang. As for her weapon, she comes equipped with the T95 LMG, which has a solid fire rate and good damage. This in combination with her Candelas allows her to be strong in a well-coordinated rush. But I'm sure what you are asking is, how was she super strong on release? Well, to fully understand how strong she was, you have to understand the meta she released in. In Operation Blood Orchid, other operators in the game that worked well with Ying were at their peak, the most important one being Glaz. Glaz was the strongest entry fragger at the time, and during Blood Orchid was at his peak. He was used a lot in higher level play, and this resulted in a smoke meta. This meta consisted of the attackers burning ADSs and then throwing their smoke grenades into the bomb site. Now, Glaz would typically use his scope to protect the planter through the smoke-filled bomb site. Then the hard breacher or shield operator would go for the plant. This was how most rounds played out back then, which is a stark difference to today where most rounds end with one of the teams eliminated. But how does this help Ying? Well, Ying has had smoke grenades as a secondary gadget since her release, and because of how important they were at the time, she would be picked a lot. Also, her Candelas worked well in the smoke meta. The Candelas allowed her to mask the sound of the planter and to disorient any defenders attempting to deny the plant. Even though her Candelas weren't even in the strongest state, the meta that she was released in allowed her to thrive, and to this day, she hasn't reached the peak she once had. But why is that? Well, it was caused by the inevitable death of the smoke meta. The smoke meta lasted for over a year. Now, where you mark the death of the smoke meta is kind of complicated, but I consider the death of the smoke meta to be when Glaz got his huge nerf. Because without Glaz, the smoke meta can't really function. This nerf came in Operation Phantom Sight. Operation Phantom Sight brought a new rework to Glaz's scope, where if he moved, the scope's thermal ability would begin to fade. This forced Glaz to play a lot more passively and pretty much killed his fragging potential on arrival. Glaz was pretty much eliminated as a serious option from your lineup after this update, and in my years of Siege, I have never seen a more drastic decline in an operator's win rate. Glaz tanked after the season, going from the attacker with the highest win rate in the game to one of the worst in a single season. Now, obviously this killed the smoke meta, but on top of that, they added Warden to the game. Warden is a defender that brings his Spec IO glasses onto the Siege roster. These glasses allow him to see through smokes, and they make him completely immune to flashbangs when they are active. I'm sure that you can see how this would be bad news for Ying. Not only was the meta that she was made for dead, but an operator was released that directly countered her. So this resulted in Ying's slow decline until her pick rate and win rate eventually stagnated. The interesting part about this whole situation is that after the death of the smoke meta, she got a lot of buffs, but these changes did nothing to help her. Some of these buffs included increasing the amount of flash pellets per Candela, she got a damage buff to her LMG, she was given secondary hard breach charges, and finally the flash detection rework gave her Candelas more consistency and a way wider range. As I said, none of these help though. Even today, she is still quite an underrated operator in my eyes. Her gadget is in the best state it has ever been. Her LMG is a solid weapon, and she still has her smoke grenades that can help her get a plant down. But despite this, her pick rate is still really low. I think this has a lot to do with Wamai being a thing. It is a lot harder nowadays to burn through all of that denial, but I also think this is due to the meta we are in. The current meta just isn't right for Ying. Siege has seen a massive shift over the past year or so into a more gunfight heavy playstyle. The game isn't nearly as reliant on strategizing and countering the enemy as it once was. Now, whether you think this is a good thing for the game or not is completely subjective, but it has affected Ying. Her gun just can't compete with the likes of the AK-12, MX-4 Storm, or even the R4C. And because her gun can't hold up, she isn't picked very much. The only reason she is even picked now is as more of a niche pick for rush strategies, but she is no longer picked as a support operator to help get the plant down. I do think we could see this change over the next couple of seasons, but right now she just isn't being picked that much. We would need a massive meta shift for her gadget and loadout to really shine. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, I would appreciate it if you would consider subscribing. You can always unsub later if you don't enjoy the content I make on the channel. Also, if you want to get involved in the conversation, you can go and follow me on Twitter. I post a ton about my opinions on Siege on there, so if you want to be able to interact with me more, that's the place to be. Now, I'm sure if you watch this video all the way through until this point, you'll definitely enjoy this one. Hopefully I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.